There were 7 people in that room, and not one of them expected me to speak. My mother placed the pen in front of me, the way you set a glass of water in front of a child, gently without explanation, as if the only reasonable thing to do was drink. She smiled and said, "You're here to sign, not to discuss." I picked up the pen. I held it for 6 seconds, and then I set it down on the oak table where my grandmother once taught me how to count money. I'm not asking for likes or subscribers. This is not about clicks. Tell me where you are and the local time. My name is Elise, and I am 32 years old. I am a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living, where it goes, where it hides, and where it lies. For 6 years, I paid every cent of my family's mortgage, 72 payments, $127,400. Not a single person in that room had ever said thank you. But the woman who placed the pen in front of me did not know 2 things. She did not know that my grandmother had built me a shield before she died, and she did not know that the house she was trying to sell already belonged to me. Let me take you back 14 years to the kitchen where everything started and where eventually everything ended. The oak table was my grandmother's, Colette Marie Morrow. She bought it in 1981 from a furniture shop in Burlington, Vermont for $215, which she told me was an absurd amount of money at the time, but worth every cent, because a good table outlasts every argument that happens around it. She was right. That table survived 43 years of Sunday dinners, 2 Thanksgivings, where someone left before dessert, 1 Christmas, where nobody spoke for an hour, and the morning I sat there at 9 years old while she stacked coins into columns and said, "Elise numbers do not have feelings. That is why they always tell the truth." I loved her for that, for the stillness of her hands when she counted, for the way she smelled like rosemary and cold cream, for the fact that she never once asked me to be anything other than careful. My mother, Jacqueline, was a different kind of woman. She was not cruel. I want to be clear about that because the easy version of this story would make her a villain, and the truth is more uncomfortable than that. My mother was someone who believed that love had a budget, and she had allocated most of it to my brother before I was born. Cade was 3 years older. He was tall early, confident early, loud early. He had my father's jaw and my mother's certainty, and when he walked into a room, my mother's posture changed. She sat up. She smiled wider. She became the best version of herself, the version she saved for guests and holidays, except with Cade, she was that version every day. Cade sees the bigger picture, she used to say at dinner. She said it so often it stopped sounding like a compliment and started sounding like a weather report, just a fact about the world you were supposed to accept. Cade sees the bigger picture. The sky is blue, past the salt. I do not know when I became our reliable girl. It was not a single moment. It was a slow, careful burial. Reliable meant I did the dishes without being asked. Reliable meant I checked the mail, sorted the bills, taped the leaking pipe under the bathroom sink with electrical tape at 13 because my father was watching football and Cade was at a friend's house. Reliable meant I earned a full scholarship to state, and my mother said, "Good, that saves us the trouble." Cade got a car for his 18th birthday, a used Civic Silver with a dent in the passenger door. I remember the dent because I remember everything about that day, the way my mother held the keys out like a trophy, the way my father clapped Cade on the shoulder, the way Cade looked at me across the driveway and grinned and said, "You're just the backup plan, Elise." He was 14 when he first said it. I was 11. We were picking teams for something basketball, I think, or maybe kickball. It does not matter. What matters is the sentence. He said it laughing the way boys say cruel things when they are testing how much weight a word can carry. I laughed too. I did not know yet that some sentences do not land when they are spoken. They land years later in a room full of strangers when someone slides a pen across a table and expects you to be reliable one more time. My father, Warren, was a mechanical engineer. Retired now. He was a quiet man who built precise things in the garage and imprecise things in his relationships. He knew the names of every tool on his pegboard, the 3/8 socket wrench, the number 2, Phillips the 40mm combination spanner. But he did not know my major in college until my junior year. He was not unkind. He was simply absent in the way that men of his generation sometimes are present at the table, but missing from the conversation a man whose love was expressed through proximity rather than language. I do not blame him entirely. Blame is a clean word for a messy thing. But I will say this, there were moments when he could have spoken, and he chose the silence instead. Every time he chose the silence. My grandmother was the only one who saw me completely. Sunday mornings before church, she would sit me at that oak table, and we would go through her recipe box, which was really a shoebox full of index cards written in her cramped handwriting. But between the cards for pot roast and lemon pound cake, there were other cards with numbers. Bank statements she had copied by hand, interest calculations, mortgage amortization schedules she had worked out on a pocket calculator with a cracked screen. And no, I do this because your mother does not, she said once, not with anger, but with the tired clarity of a woman who had been watching the same mistake for 30 years. I did not understand then. I thought she was teaching me recipes. She was teaching me how to read a family's lives through its finances. By the time I left for college, I knew 3 things. I knew that Cade would always be the first name my mother said when she answered the phone. I knew that my father would always choose peace over truth. And I knew that the oak table in my grandmother's kitchen had heard more honest words than any person in that house had ever spoken out loud. What I did not know, what I would not learn for another 14 years, was that my grandmother had already built me a shield. She had done it quietly, the way she did everything with a pen and a notary and a woman named Simone, who kept secrets the way other people kept jewelry locked away, polished and ready for exactly the right moment. College was 4 years of learning how to disappear in one place. It was learning to become visible in another. At State, I was Elise Morrow-Dean's List Forensic Accounting track. In Professor Adelman's financial crime seminar, I was the girl in the 3rd row who always had the answer, but raised her hand like she was apologizing for knowing it. At home, I was our reliable girl, the one who came back for Thanksgiving with a casserole and left with a list of things that needed fixing. Cade, meanwhile, was discovering his destiny. That was the word my mother used. Destiny. He dropped out of a business program after 3 semesters. The professors didn't get his vision, and launched his first venture at 23, a meal kit company. He called it Fresh Forge. My mother invested $8,000 from the household savings. My father said nothing. Fresh Forge lasted 11 months and lost $14,000 in total, which is an impressive feat for a company that never shipped more than 40 boxes. He's learning, my mother said at Thanksgiving that year, passing the green beans to nobody in particular. The best entrepreneurs fail first. How many times? I asked. She looked at me the way you look at a stain on a good tablecloth. Don't be ugly about it, Elise. I was not being ugly. I was being precise. But precision in my family was a form of ugliness when it was aimed at the wrong person. I graduated summa cum laude. My mother sent a card. Inside she had written, "Proud of you. Call Cade, he's having a rough month." That was May. By August, Cade had launched his second venture, a co-working space in a strip mall outside of Dover. My mother co-signed the lease. My father helped him paint the walls on a Saturday. I know this because 3 months later, I saw the photo on my mother's refrigerator, the 2 of them in matching paint-stained shirts, grinning like they had built something together. Nobody took a photo when I passed the CPA exam. I did not expect one. Expecting a congratulatory gesture presumes a history of receiving them, and I did not. I found my first job at a mid-size firm in Hartford, Adler, Sims, and Kresge, forensic accounting. My starting salary was $51,000 a year. That felt like a fortune to someone who had eaten ramen for 4 years out of necessity, not tradition. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment with a window that faced a parking lot and a landlord who fixed things on the second request, which I considered luxurious. If you have ever been the one your family calls only when something is broken, hit subscribe. It came on a Tuesday in October. I was 26. My mother's voice had that specific texture it took on when she needed something, but wanted it to sound like she was offering something warm, slightly higher than usual with a pause, before the ask designed to feel like concern. Elise, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about the house. The house. My grandmother's house. The house with the oak table and the recipe box, and the garden where Colette grew tomatoes so ugly they were beautiful. the house where I learned to count, the house my mother had lived in since my grandmother's health started declining. Jacqueline described it as taking care of Mom, but from the outside, it looked a lot like moving in and redecorating. "The mortgage is behind," she said. 3 months. The bank sent a letter. I remember the specific silence that followed. Not the absence of sound, there were sounds, a car alarm somewhere outside my window, the hum of the refrigerator, but the absence of surprise. I had been waiting for this call, the way you wait for a bill you know is coming. "How much?" I asked. $3,200, but that's just to catch up. The monthly is $1,778. "What about Cade?" Another pause. This one was longer, more practiced. "Your brother can't right now. The co-working space is in a difficult phase. You know how it is." I did know how it was. Cade was in a difficult phase, the way the ocean is in a difficult phase, constantly, indefinitely, and with no evidence of improvement. "You're the responsible one, Elise. You always have been. This is what family does." There it was. The sentence that was not a compliment, but a collar. You are the responsible one. You are the backup plan. You are the one we call when the account is empty, and the other option is the one with vision. I paid the $3,200 the next morning. I set up an automatic transfer for $1,778 on the first of every month, and I began keeping records because that is what forensic accountants do. Not out of suspicion, not yet, out of habit. The way a carpenter squares a frame before hanging a door, not because he thinks the wall is crooked, but because measuring is how he knows the world is still level. I created a folder on my laptop, blue icon. I named it House. Every month I screenshotted the confirmation. Every transfer I noted the date, the amount, the remaining balance. 72 times, over 6 years. 72 receipts. 1,778 multiplied by 72 is $127,816. I recorded it as $127,400 because 2 payments were slightly short from processing delays. Precision matters to me, even when it hurts. My family never mentioned the payments, not once. My mother called on birthdays at Christmas, and whenever Cade needed something tied to money, a co-signer, a reference, or a quick look at a contract he did not understand. My father called on my birthday and once on a Wednesday in March to ask if I knew how to reset the Wi-Fi router. That was the longest conversation we had in 2 years. It lasted 4 minutes. During those 6 years, 2 things happened that my family did not know about. The first was that I bought a condominium, a 2-bedroom in a converted mill building on Prospect Street, 11 minutes from my office. $310,000. I paid it off in 5 years by living as if I still earned my starting salary. My family believed I rented a studio apartment in East Hartford because I had mentioned it once in passing, and no one had ever asked a follow-up question. The second thing was that I saved $187,000, not in a retirement account, in a brokerage account that earned 7.3% annually because I am a forensic accountant, and I understand compound interest the way my brother understands excuses, fluently, instinctively, and without effort. I tell you this not to boast. I tell you this because in 2 years, my mother would sit across from me at my grandmother's oak table and tell me that selling the house was what's best for everyone. And she would have no idea that the woman she was asking to sign away her grandmother's home was the same woman who had been paying for it all along. But something else happened first, something that changed the shape of everything that came after. My grandmother died on a Thursday in February. I know it was a Thursday because I had just finished reviewing a case file, a trucking company in Bridgeport that had been hiding fuel reimbursements inside payroll, and my phone buzzed on the desk at 3:47 in the afternoon. It was my father. He never called during work hours. He never called at all, really, unless it was my birthday, or the Wi-Fi needed resetting, so when I saw his name on the screen, I already knew. Elise. His voice was flat and careful the way he sounded when he was reading instructions off a manual. Your grandmother passed this afternoon, in her sleep. The hospice said it was peaceful. Peaceful. I held that word the way you hold a cup that is too hot wanting to set it down, but having nowhere to put it. Peaceful meant she was alone. Peaceful meant the lavender they pumped through the diffuser in her room had done its job. Peaceful meant I had visited her 11 days earlier, sat beside her bed, and held her hand while she murmured about the tomato garden. I told her I would come back Saturday, but I did not come back Saturday because of a work deadline, and now Saturday would never come again. "When is the service?" I asked. "Sunday. Your mother is handling it." Of course she was. Jacqueline handled things. That was her gift, the way she could take something that belonged to someone else and make it look as if she'd built it herself from scratch. She had done it with the house. She moved in when Colette's memory began to slip, rearranged the furniture, replaced the curtains, and changed the locks. She had done it with my father, reshaping his silences into agreement, until he forgot that silence was supposed to be a choice, not a habit. And now she would do it with my grandmother's death. She would organize the flowers, choose the readings, stand at the front of the church, and accept condolences as if she had been the one who lost the most. The service was at Grace Lutheran, 43 people. I counted, because counting is what I do when I cannot feel what I am supposed to feel. 43 people, 9 flower arrangements, 1 photograph of Colette on an easel beside the casket. It was the picture from her 65th birthday, the one where she laughed with her mouth open holding a glass of red wine, looking like a woman who had figured out how much joy she was owed and decided to collect every drop. My father stood beside me for a moment before the service began. He adjusted his tie, looked at the photograph of Colette on the easel, and said, "She would have hated those flowers. She liked wildflowers, not arrangements." I waited for him to say more. He pressed his lips together, nodded once at nothing, and walked to the front pew to sit beside my mother. Cade did not come. He sent a text to the family group chat at 9:14 that morning. "Flight got canceled. Thinking of you all." His flight was from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a 3-hour drive. I did not point this out. I was tired of being the one who pointed things out. My mother sat in the front pew in a black dress I had never seen before. She held my father's arm. She nodded at the minister. She accepted every handshake, every hug, every whispered. She was a wonderful woman, with a practiced grace that could pass for sincerity. Maybe it was sincere, and maybe that's the most confusing thing, that Jacqueline could love my grandmother and still take everything she had, like weather, that is both beautiful and destructive. I sat 3 rows back. Beside me was a woman I did not recognize, small and silver-haired, wearing a gray wool coat with a moth hole near the left cuff. She smelled like clay and turpentine. After the service, she touched my elbow and said, "You're Colette's granddaughter, the one with the numbers?" "I'm Elise. I know who you are. I'm June Calloway. I lived next door to your grandmother for 19 years. She looked at me with eyes that were wet but steady, the way a lake looks after a storm has passed through. "Your grandmother talked about you every single day. Not Cade, not Jacqueline, you. She said you were the only one who understood that a table is just a table until someone sits down and tells the truth at it." I did not cry in front of June Calloway. I waited until I was in my car in the parking lot behind the church, with the heater running and the windshield fogging over, and then I cried in a way that did not feel like grief. It felt like something heavier, like confirmation. Stay with me, because what happened next in the kitchen changed everything about how I saw this family. After the reception, my mother invited everyone back to the house. It was my grandmother's, the one I had been paying for. There were sandwiches cut into triangles and a fruit platter from the deli and a pot of coffee that smelled burnt. People stood in the living room and spoke in the low, respectful tones that funerals require. My mother moved through the living room with a plate of sandwiches, touching elbows, nodding at stories, performing grief, like a woman who had studied for the exam. A neighbor named Bill asked, "Jacqueline, will you be keeping the house?" And my mother smiled the wide, certain smile and said, "Of course. This is the family home. I promised Mom I would take care of it." She said it 3 feet from the kitchen, where her mother's recipe box had already been emptied into a trash bag. I stood in the kitchen alone at the oak table. I ran my finger along a scratch I had made when I was 12 with a steak knife I used to open a package. That was when I saw Simone. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the back hallway, holding a coat over one arm and a small wooden box in the other hand. The box was maybe 8 inches long, 5 inches wide, dark walnut with a brass clasp that had gone green with age. I had never seen it before, but something about the way Simone held it close to her body like a newborn, or a document, told me it was not hers. Simone Beaulieu, my grandmother's younger sister. The family called her the difficult one, because she had never married, lived alone in a cabin outside of Montpellier, and made pottery that sold in galleries for prices my mother found either offensive or enviable, depending on her mood. Simone came to Christmas every third year and sent birthday cards with dried flowers pressed inside them. She was the only adult in my family who had never asked me for money. "Elise," she said. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Not here, not today, but soon." She looked at the box. Then she looked at me. Then she put on her coat and walked out the back door into the February cold without saying goodbye to anyone else. I did not follow her. I did not ask what was in the box. I stood at the oak table with a cup of coffee I was not drinking and watched the door close behind the only person in my family who had ever kept a secret for the right reasons. 2 more years passed. I continued paying the mortgage $17.78, first of every month, 72 seconds to confirm the transfer. 1 screenshot, 1 entry in the blue folder. My mother called on birthdays. Cade launched Venture Number 3, an app for connecting freelance photographers with real estate agents. It was called LensBridge. It lasted 7 months and cost my mother another $11,000. My father rebuilt a carburetor in the garage and did not call me for 5 months straight. I was promoted to senior forensic accountant. My caseload doubled. I found an embezzlement scheme inside a chain of veterinary clinics. A receptionist had been routing insurance overpayments into a personal account for 3 years, totaling $61,000. I traced it in 9 days. My supervisor, a man named Clark, who spoke entirely in sports metaphors, told me I had a nose for the invisible ball. I did not know what he meant. I understood the tone and put the phrase into a small, quiet folder inside myself that kept proof I was not what my family assumed. And then on a Monday in September, 4 years after my grandmother's funeral, my mother called. 5 months of silence broken by a single sentence. "Family meeting. Sunday. It's about the house." I drove to the house on a Sunday morning in October. The leaves on Grandview Lane had turned the color of old pennies, and the air smelled like wood smoke, and something sweet, a neighbor baking maybe, or the memory of my grandmother's apple butter, simmering on the stove in a pot she never let anyone else touch. I parked behind Cade's rental car, a black Audi SUV that was too large for the driveway, and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the house. It looked different. Smaller somehow, the way childhood places always do when you return with adult eyes. It was different in specific, measurable ways. The shutters had been repainted gray instead of the blue my grandmother had chosen in 2003. The garden was gone, not overgrown, not neglected, gone, replaced with river stone and 2 boxwood shrubs trimmed into shapes that looked like they were trying very hard to be elegant. My mother's work. She had erased my grandmother's tomatoes and replaced them with geometry. The front door was open. I could hear voices inside my mother's pitched in the register she used for occasions that required an audience. Another voice answered mail and measured the sort that bills by the hour. I stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was the oak table. It had been moved from the kitchen into the living room, which felt wrong in a way I could not immediately articulate, like seeing a church pew in a shopping mall. There were papers on it, a neat stack, white with blue backing and tab dividers, the kind of documents that come from a legal office and carry the weight of decisions that have already been made without you. My mother stood at the far end of the table in a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings. She smiled when she saw me. It was a specific smile, the one that meant she had already decided something and was now performing the part where she pretended to include you in the decision. "Elise, good. Sit down, sweetheart." Cade was sitting to her right, leaned back in a chair with his ankle on his knee, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, nodded once, and went back to scrolling. He had gained weight since the funeral. Not a lot, but enough that his polo shirt pulled across the chest. It suggested he had stopped caring about the details of his appearance, which was unusual for a man who had once spent 45 minutes choosing a font for a business card. My father sat at the opposite end, hands folded on the table, thumbs turning slow circles around each other. He looked at me when I walked in, and something moved behind his eyes, not guilt exactly, but its neighbor, the expression of a man who knows something is about to happen and has already decided not to stop it. Beside Cade sat a man I had never met. Mid-50s, silver glasses, a navy suit that fit too well for a Sunday morning, in a house that smelled like my grandmother's lavender sachets. He had a leather portfolio open in front of him and a pen resting on a yellow legal pad, where he had written 3 lines I could not read from across the room. "Elise, this is Dennis Fry," my mother said. "He's helping us with the estate." Dennis Fry stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm and practiced the handshake of a man who met strangers professionally. "Ms. Morrow, a pleasure." "Helping us with what specifically?" I asked. My mother's smile held. It was impressive the way a levee is impressive engineered to contain something that wants very badly to move in a different direction. "The house, Elise. We've had an offer, a very good offer." She opened the blue-backed folder and turned it so I could see the first page, a purchase agreement. The buyer was listed as Ridgecrest Development Partners, LLC. The proposed price was $485,000. At the bottom of the page was a signature line for every family member listed on the property's chain of title, and beside each line a yellow sticky tab with an arrow pointing down. Sign here, and here, and here. Ridgecrest is a real estate development group out of Stamford. Dennis Fry said, speaking the way lawyers speak when they want you to feel informed but not empowered. They're looking to develop 3 lots on this street into a mixed-use residential project. The offer is 12% above assessed value. It's quite favorable. If you've ever sat in a room where a decision is already made and your role is to keep your face still, the first word that comes to mind is boundaries. "How would the proceeds be distributed?" I asked. My mother looked at Dennis. Dennis looked at his legal pad. Cade looked at his phone. "The proposal," Dennis said carefully, "is a 3-way split adjusted for contribution to the estate's upkeep. Your mother, as the primary resident and caretaker, would receive 50%. Your brother, who has expressed interest in using his share to fund a development project, would receive 30%, and you would receive 20%, $97,000, for the woman who had paid $127,400 in mortgage payments over 6 years. I did the math in the time it takes to blink. I was being asked to accept a net loss of $30,400 for the privilege of giving away my grandmother's home. "And the authorization," I said. "Who approved the listing grandmother's estate hasn't been through probate." A pause. Not a long one, but long enough for me to hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the same refrigerator my grandmother had bought in 2009 because the old one made a noise like a cat in a tin can. "Your mother holds power of attorney," Dennis said. "My grandmother has been dead for 4 years. Another pause. This one was longer. My mother stepped in smooth and practiced the way she always did when the conversation moved toward a surface she had not prepared. "Your grandmother signed the documents before she passed. It's all in order, Elise. Dennis has reviewed everything." I looked at the signature page. I have spent 9 years reading signatures. I have examined forged checks, falsified invoices, and doctored tax returns. Once I even found corporate board minutes fabricated by a treasurer who assumed no one would notice every signature tilted the same way. I know what a real signature looks like. I know what a real signature feels like, the pressure, the speed, the small hesitations that a human hand makes when it is writing something it means. I did not say anything. Not yet. I had learned after years in my profession that the most dangerous thing you can do with a lie is confront it before you have measured its shape. "I need some time," I said. Jacqueline's smile cracked for exactly 1 second. 1 second, I counted. "Time for what?" Cade said, looking up from his phone for the first time since I had sat down. "It's a good deal, Elise. Just sign it. We've all agreed." "I need to read the documents." "Dennis can walk you through them right now." "I need to read them alone." My mother placed her hand on Cade's arm the way a trainer calms a horse. Gentle pressure downward, a reminder of who was in control. "Of course, sweetheart. Take the weekend. But Ridgecrest needs an answer by the 15th. I stood. I picked up the blue-backed folder. No one stopped me. Dennis Fry wrote something on his legal pad. Cade exhaled through his nose. My father's thumbs continued their slow, circular orbit around each other, and he said without looking up, "Drive safe, Elise." I walked out of my grandmother's house carrying the document that was designed to erase her, and I drove home to the condominium that no one in my family knew I owned, sat down at my own kitchen table, a simple pine table from IKEA, no history, no weight, and opened the folder under a lamp that made the paper look almost blue. The signature on the power of attorney was on page 11. I looked at it for 7 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the scanned copy of my grandmother's birthday card from 2018, the last one she sent me, the one that said, "For Elise who counts everything except how much she is worth." I placed the two signatures side by side. They were not the same hand. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my pine table with the purchase agreement on one side and my laptop on the other. I did what I have been trained to do for 9 years. I followed the paper. The power of attorney was dated June 8th, 2024. My grandmother died on February 9th, 2022, 28 months apart. A dead woman does not sign documents. This is arithmetic. I pulled up the Hartford County Recorder's website. I searched the property index for the house on Grandview Lane. The deed was still in my grandmother's name. Colette Marie Morrow, recorded 1986. No transfers, no liens other than the mortgage which I had been paying for 6 years. But there was a new filing I had not seen before. A quitclaim deed prepared 7 months earlier, transferring interest from the estate of Colette Marie Morrow to Jacqueline A. Morrow. It had not been recorded yet. It was still pending, waiting for a notary stamp and a filing fee. 7 months. My mother had been planning this for 7 months, possibly longer. The meeting was not a discussion. It was a closing. I was not a participant. I was a signature. I opened a second browser window and searched Ridgecrest Development Partners. The LLC was registered in Connecticut 8 months ago. The registered agent was a firm called Crestview Legal Services. I searched Crestview Legal Services. The managing partner was Dennis Fry. I closed my laptop. I know it was 11 minutes because the microwave clock said 1:17 when I closed the screen and 1:28 when I opened it again. In those 11 minutes, I did not think about forgery or quitclaim deeds or the fact that my brother's lawyer was also the buyer's lawyer. I thought about the oak table. I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they shook in the last year, and how she could barely hold a pen. The idea that she had signed anything in June of 2024 was not just a lie, but an insult to the woman who had taught me that numbers always tell the truth. And then I thought about the Tuesday when I was 26 and my mother called and said, "The mortgage is behind," and I paid it without asking why. And the Tuesday after that, and the 70 Tuesdays after that, every single month for 6 years, I had sent $1,778 into a house that my mother was now trying to sell out from under me. And not once, not one single time, in 72 months, had anyone in my family said thank you. If you have ever paid for something that nobody acknowledged, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The next morning I called Cade. I do not know why I called Cade instead of my mother. Maybe because Cade had always been the honest one in his cruelty. He said what he meant, even when what he meant was ugly. My mother wrapped her intentions in cashmere. Cade just threw them. He picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear a coffee shop behind him, the grinding of beans, the murmur of people who were having better mornings. "Elise, did you sign it?" "I have a question first." "Okay." "Who has been paying the mortgage on the house for the last 6 years?" Silence. Not the silence of a man who is thinking. The silence of a man who is deciding which version of the truth to deploy. I have heard this silence in depositions, in conference rooms, in the offices of CFOs who are about to learn that I have already found what they are about to deny. It is a specific silence. It has a texture. It sounds like someone swallowing. "The estate handles that," he said finally. "Some kind of auto payment from Grandma's account." Grandmother's account was closed 8 months after she died. I checked. A longer silence. The coffee grinder stopped. Someone laughed. "Look, Elise, I don't know the details. Mom handles the finances. You know that." I know that I have transferred $1,778 to the mortgage servicer every month for 6 years. 72 payments, $127,400 from my personal checking account. This silence was different. This was the silence of a man who has just realized that the floor he is standing on has a hole in it. That was your choice, he said, quietly. The confidence was gone. What remained was the sentence structure of a man who has been taught to defend himself with semantics. My choice. Mom said you offered. She said you wanted to help. Family takes care of family, Elise. You've always been the backup plan. I heard him breathe. Once, twice. Don't make this into something it's not, he said. The house needs to sell. I've got a project that needs capital. Mom and Dad need the equity to downsize. You'll get your 20% and you can go back to your little studio and your spreadsheets and we can all move on. My little studio, my spreadsheets. 20% of my grandmother's house for the woman who paid the mortgage while he launched 3 failed companies on my mother's money. I wanted to say all of that. I wanted to list every number, every receipt, every month I had eaten lentils for dinner so I could send $1,778 to a family that called me reliable, the way you call a dishwasher. Reliable, grateful for the functions, indifferent to the machine. But I did not say it. Because I am a forensic accountant, and the first rule of forensic accounting is this: never reveal your evidence in a phone call. Reveal it in a room full of people who can watch the math do the talking. I'll let you know by the 15th, I said. Elise? Drive safe, Cade. I hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time after that, not crying, not thinking, just sitting with my back against the cabinet and the linoleum cold under my legs. I held my phone, scrolled to my grandmother's contact, which I had never deleted, looked at her name, Grandma Colette, and thought about the oak table, the coin columns, and the way she said, "Numbers do not have feelings, Elise. That is why they always tell the truth." She was right about numbers, but she was wrong about feelings, because that morning, sitting on my kitchen floor in a condominium nobody knew I owned. Holding a phone with a dead woman's name on it, I felt every single payment, all 72 of them, and they felt like a door that had been closing so slowly I had mistaken the motion for stillness. I did not call my mother. I did not call Cade again. I picked myself up off the floor, made a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. Then I called Simone. Simone picked up on the second ring. She did not say hello. She said, "I was wondering when you would call." There was no surprise in her voice, no warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it, the steadiness of a woman who had been holding a door open for 4 years and had never once considered closing it. I could hear wind behind her and the faint clink of ceramic, and I imagined her in her cabin outside of Montpellier, standing at a work table covered in wet clay, the phone pressed between her ear and her shoulder, the way artists hold phones like an interruption they have already forgiven. "The house," I said, "they're trying to sell it." "I know." "You know, your mother called me 6 months ago, asked me to sign a waiver relinquishing any claim to the estate. I told her I had no claim to relinquish and hung up. She called again 2 weeks later. I did not answer. She sent a letter through Dennis Fry. I recycled it. I pressed my palm flat against the pine table. 6 months. My mother had been building the architecture of this sale for 6 months. She called relatives, hired lawyers, filed quitclaim deeds, and still failed to secure the one person the family had written off as irrelevant. Simone at the funeral. "You had a box." "I still have it." "What's in it?" A pause. Not the kind of pause that means hesitation. It was the kind of pause where someone chose their words as if they were setting down something heavy. They chose each one slowly to make sure nothing broke. "Your grandmother gave it to me in November of 2018, 4 months before the dementia diagnosis. She drove to my cabin 4 hours in that green Subaru with the broken heater, and she sat at my kitchen table and she said, 'Simone, I need you to keep something for Elise. Not Jacqueline, not Cade, not Warren, Elise, and you cannot open it, and you cannot talk about it, and you cannot give it to her until she calls you herself.'" I closed my eyes. I could see my grandmother in that green Subaru, the one that rattled above 50 miles an hour driving through the November cold, with the heater broken and a wooden box on the passenger seat. She drove 4 hours to give her sister a box she could not explain for a granddaughter who would not call for another 6 years, because she knew the way she always knew that one day the numbers would stop adding up, and I would need something that could not be forged. "Can I come see you?" I asked. "Saturday," Simone said. "Bring your appetite. I'm making chowder." I drove to Montpellier on Saturday morning. 3 hours and 42 minutes, which I know because I checked the odometer twice, once at the start and once when I pulled into the gravel driveway of a cabin that looked exactly like the kind of place a woman builds when she has stopped asking permission to be herself. Small, clean, a pottery wheel visible through the window, a stack of firewood against the south wall split with precision that suggested Simone did it herself. A cat on the porch railing orange watching me with the calm authority of an animal that has never been disappointed by a human being. Simone met me at the door. She was shorter than I remembered, and her hair had gone fully silver since the funeral, but her hands were still strong. The hands of a woman who shaped clay for a living, who made beautiful things out of formless material, which, when I think about it, is not so different from what my grandmother had done with that box. We ate chowder at her kitchen table. She asked about my work. I told her about the veterinary clinic case, the $61,000 in rerouted insurance payments, and she laughed a real laugh, loud and unself-conscious, and said, "Your grandmother would have loved that story. She always said you had a nose for the crooked line." After lunch, Simone went to a closet in the hallway and came back with the wooden box. Walnut, brass clasp green with age, 8 inches by 5. She set it on the table between our empty bowls and said, "She told me you would know what to do with it." If you have ever received something someone prepared for you years before you needed it, this is the moment the story turns. I opened the clasp. Inside, wrapped in a piece of linen that smelled faintly of rosemary, my grandmother's smell, the smell of her kitchen, the smell of Sunday mornings and coin columns, and the truth was a document. 11 pages, blue backing, a notary seal dated March 14th, 2019. It was an irrevocable trust. The grantor was Colette Marie Morrow. The trustee was Simone Elaine Beaulieu. The sole beneficiary was Elise Marie Morrow. The asset was the property at 14 Grandview Lane, my grandmother's house. The house where I learned to count. The house I had been paying for. The house my mother was trying to sell. Irrevocable. That word matters. An irrevocable trust cannot be dissolved, amended, or overridden by any party other than the beneficiary. It does not pass through probate. It does not respond to power of attorney. It does not care who has been living in the house, or who painted the shutters gray, or who replaced the tomato garden with riverstone. It sits patient and immovable, like a number that does not have feelings waiting for the day someone needs it to tell the truth. My grandmother had built me a shield 4 years before I knew I needed one. I read the document 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time slowly, the way I read case files, taking in every clause, every whereas, every provision. On page 7, section 4.3, I found the sentence that mattered most. No sale, transfer, encumbrance, or conveyance of the trust property shall be valid without the express written consent of the sole beneficiary. No sale without my consent. My mother's quitclaim deed was meaningless. Dennis Fry's purchase agreement was unenforceable. The entire architecture of the sale, the offer from Ridgecrest, the 3-way split the yellow sticky tabs that said, "Sign here," was built on a foundation that did not exist. I looked at Simone. She watched me with an expression I hadn't seen on anyone else in a long time. It was not pride, it was not sympathy, it was recognition. The look of someone who has been invisible her whole life, watching someone else, finally become visible. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to call a lawyer," I said. "Not Dennis Fry." Simone smiled. It was a small smile, quiet, the kind that starts at the corners of the mouth and never quite reaches the eyes because it is carrying too much history to travel that far. "Your grandmother said you would say something like that." I drove home that evening with the trust deed in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, exactly where my grandmother had placed the wooden box 6 years earlier. Monday morning, I called a woman named Trisha Vaughn. Trisha was a real estate attorney at a firm in West Hartford. I had found her through a colleague at Adler, Sims and Kresge who described her as the kind of lawyer who reads footnotes for fun. I liked her immediately. She had a voice like gravel wrapped in patience, and when I explained the situation, the trust, the forged power of attorney, the quitclaim deed, the sale, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Ms. Morrow, I am going to need you to send me everything, and I mean everything." I sent her the trust deed, the purchase agreement, the quitclaim deed filing, the power of attorney with the forged signature, my grandmother's birthday card from 2018 with her real handwriting, and the blue folder, all 72 receipts, every month, every amount, every screenshot. Trisha called me back 2 days later. "The trust is airtight," she said. "The property cannot be sold without your written consent. The power of attorney is fraudulent on its face. Your grandmother was deceased at the time of execution. And the quitclaim deed has not been recorded, which means it has no legal effect. Ms. Morrow, you own this house. You have always owned this house, and no one in your family knows it." "I would like them to find out on Sunday," I said, at the table. Another pause, shorter this time. "I'll clear my afternoon." Sunday came the way Sundays always came to that house, slowly with the smell of coffee that was slightly too strong. My mother's heels clicked on the hardwood. She wore them even at home, because Jacqueline Morrow did not believe in being underdressed for any occasion, including the sale of her dead mother's house. I arrived at 11:15. Trisha Vaughn arrived at 11:17 in a gray sedan and parked on the street, not in the driveway. She understood without my having to explain that the driveway was a territory and we were not here to claim it, we were here to read a document. Simone arrived at 11:20. She parked behind Trisha. She was wearing the same gray wool coat from the funeral, moth hole and all. She carried only a small leather handbag and the look of a woman who had waited 4 years for this Sunday. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She was smiling. The smile dimmed by exactly 2 degrees when she saw Trisha, and by another 3 when she saw Simone. "Elise, who are your friends?" "This is Trisha Vaughn. She's my attorney." "Your attorney?" My mother repeated the word, the way you repeat a diagnosis you did not expect, carefully testing its weight, checking whether it changes the shape of the room. "Elise, this is a family matter. We don't need lawyers. Dennis is here as a courtesy. Trisha is here as mine." My mother looked at Simone. "And why is she here?" Simone did not answer. She stepped past Jacqueline into the hallway with the quiet authority of a woman who had grown up in this house before Jacqueline had set foot in it. She crossed into the living room and stood by the oak table, its mismatched chairs, a habit my grandmother had kept because she thought matching furniture said more about looks than comfort. The room was arranged exactly as it had been the previous Sunday, the purchase agreement in its blue-backed folder, the yellow, sticky tabs. Dennis Fry in his navy suit, silver glasses catching the light from the window, where my grandmother's lace curtains had been replaced with linen blinds. Cade was already seated, phone face down on the table for once, which meant my mother had told him this was important. My father sat at the far end, thumb-circling eyes on the wood grain, a man who had perfected the art of being present without participating. 5 people had been in this room last Sunday. Now there were 7. The 2 additional chairs changed the geometry of everything. "Please," my mother said, gesturing to the table with a graciousness that cost her visible effort. "Sit." We sat. Trisha placed her briefcase on the floor beside her chair. She did not open it. She folded her hands on the table and waited. This is what good lawyers do. They wait. They let the room fill with its own noise. They waited for it to become unbearable until someone else spoke first. Dennis Fry spoke first. "Ms. Morrow," he said, addressing me with the professional caution of a man who had noticed the second lawyer and was recalculating. "Have you had a chance to review the purchase agreement?" "I have." "And do you have any questions before we proceed?" "I do, but I'd like Trisha to ask them if that's all right." Dennis looked at my mother. My mother looked at Cade. Cade looked at his phone, remembered it was face down, and looked at the wall instead. My father's thumb stopped moving for the first time since I had arrived. Tricia opened her briefcase. She removed a single manila folder, not thick, not dramatic, just a folder, and placed it on the oak table beside the purchase agreement. The two documents sat side by side like two versions of the same story. One written by my mother and one written by my grandmother, and only one of them was true. "Mr. Fry," Tricia said. Her voice was level, unhurried, the voice of a woman who read footnotes for entertainment. "I'd like to begin with a question about your role in this transaction. You are representing the Morrow family in the sale of the property at 14 Grandview Lane. Is that correct?" "That's correct." "And the buyer is Ridgecrest Development Partners, LLC, registered in Connecticut 8 months ago. Is that also correct?" "It is." "And the registered agent for Ridgecrest Development Partners is Crestview Legal Services, of which you are the managing partner. Is that correct?" If you have ever watched a man realize that the room he designed has a door he forgot to lock, you know what Dennis Fry's face looked like in that moment. It was not fear. It was recalibration, the rapid, visible process of a man rearranging his features to project calm while his interior architecture was collapsing one floor at a time. The arrangement is disclosed in the... Was the dual representation disclosed to all parties? Tricia asked. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Jacqueline was informed. Was Elise informed? Silence. My mother shifted in her chair. The pearl earrings caught the light. "I was not informed," I said. Dennis Fry removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from his breast pocket. It was the small ritual men used when they needed 3 seconds to decide whether to continue lying or to begin the careful process of telling the truth in a way that still protected them. "This is a technicality," my mother said. Her voice had shifted registers lower now, more controlled the voice she used when she felt the conversation moving toward a surface she had not reinforced. "The point is that we have a fair offer and the family needs to move forward. Elise, sweetheart. I know this feels complicated, but your grandmother would have wanted us to..." "My grandmother," Tricia said, made her wishes quite clear. She opened the manila folder. Inside was the trust deed. 11 pages, blue backing, notary seal dated March 14th, 2019. The same document that had traveled from my grandmother's hands to a green Subaru, to a Walnut Box, to a cabin in Vermont, to a chowder-stained kitchen table, to this moment. This room, this oak table, that had heard more truth than any person sitting around it. Tricia turned to page 1 and began to read. "This is a declaration of irrevocable trust, executed on March 14th, 2019, by Colette Marie Morrow as grantor, naming Simone Elaine Beaulieu as trustee for the sole benefit of Elise Marie Morrow, beneficiary." The room did not go silent. The room had been silent. What happened was that the silence changed. It lengthened into a shape. Everyone felt a pause so complete that small movements sounded. Loud watches ticked too loudly. The blinds made a whisper, and every face turned toward whoever could then break it. My mother's hand moved to the edge of the table. Her fingers pressed into the wood, my grandmother's wood, the oak, that had survived 43 years, and every argument that had ever happened around it, and she said very quietly, "That is not possible." "It is recorded with the Hartford County Probate Court," Tricia said. She turned to page 7, section 4.3, and read the sentence that my grandmother had written into the document like a lock on a door that only I could open. "No sale, transfer, encumbrance, or conveyance of the trust property shall be valid without the express written consent of the sole beneficiary. The sole beneficiary is Elise Marie Morrow, and Ms. Morrow has not given consent." Dennis Fry was the first to move. He reached across the table and took the trust deed from Tricia's hands, not roughly, but with the specific urgency of a man who needs to verify that the ground beneath him has actually shifted. He read page 1. He turned to page 7. He read section 4.3. Then he flipped to page 11, where the notary seal sat in the lower left corner, like a small patient bomb that had been ticking for 6 years. "I was not informed of this trust," he said. He said it to my mother, not to Tricia, not to me, to Jacqueline. The tone killed the politeness he'd shown since our first handshake. I could tell exactly how Dennis Fry's next 40 minutes as a professional were going to play out now. My mother did not look at Dennis. She looked at Simone. "Are you?" she said. The word came out like a stone dropped into still water, small, hard-sending ripples in every direction. "You did this." Simone sat at the corner of the oak table, hands wrapped around a glass of water she'd poured herself without asking. It felt like the most Simone thing I'd ever seen. She had walked into a house taken from her sister's memory and poured herself a glass as if she still belonged there, because she did. "Colette did this," Simone said. "4 years ago, before the diagnosis, before you changed the curtains and paved the garden and told everyone you were taking care of her when what you were doing was taking inventory. That is not fair." Fair?" Simone repeated the word, the way my mother had repeated attorney, testing it, holding it up to the light, finding it insufficient. "Jacqueline, you moved into her house when she could not remember where she put her reading glasses. You replaced her furniture. You threw away her recipe box. You told Cade the house was his inheritance, and you told Elise the mortgage was her responsibility, and you did both of those things in the same calendar year. Do not talk to me about fair." Cade's chair scraped against the floor. He was leaning forward now, both hands flat on the table, the posture of a man who has been told his entire life that forward momentum is the same thing as competence. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "We can contest the trust. Grandma had dementia. She wasn't competent to sign." Tricia answered before I could. She did not look up from the folder. "The trust was executed on March 14th, 2019. The dementia diagnosis was recorded on July 9th, 2019. 3 months and 25 days after the trust was signed. At the time of execution, Ms. Colette Morrow had full legal capacity as attested by her physician, Dr. Irwin Pratt, in a letter dated March 12, 2019, which is included as Exhibit B of the trust document." She turned to Exhibit B. She placed it on the table beside the trust deed. It was a single page on the letterhead, a doctor's statement that Colette Marie Morrow was of sound mind and body and able to sign documents. My grandmother had thought of everything. She had driven 4 hours in a broken heater. She had visited her doctor 2 days before the signing. She had given the box to the one person in the family that everyone else had written off. She had done it while she could still remember where she put her reading glasses. She knew someone would later try to weaponize her, forgetting against the granddaughter she'd taught to count. "If someone in your family built you a shield you didn't find until years later, I need to hear your story." "The capacity letter is irrelevant," my mother said. "This family agreed." "This family," I said, "did not agree to anything." It was the first time I had spoken in 6 minutes. I know because I had been counting. 6 minutes and 14 seconds of watching other people argue about a house I had been paying for and a trust I had never known about. My grandmother's absence was louder in that room than every voice combined. I reached into the bag at my feet and removed the blue folder. Not a briefcase, not a legal binder, a folder. The same folder I had kept on my laptop for 6 years, except now it was printed 72 pages each one. A screenshot of a bank transfer confirmation. Each one dated, each one showing the same amount, $1,778, from the checking account of Elise M. Morrow to the mortgage servicer for 14 Grandview Lane. I placed it on the oak table. I did not open it. I did not need to. Tricia did. "My client," Tricia said, "has made 72 consecutive monthly mortgage payments on this property beginning October 1st, 2020 and continuing through September 1st, 2026. The total amount paid is $127,400. No family member has acknowledged, reimbursed, or contributed to these payments." She turned the folder so it faced my mother. Page 1, October 2020, 1778, confirmed, screenshot, timestamp. My mother stared at the page. She did not touch it. She stared at it the way you stare at a mirror that is showing you a face you do not recognize. "That was her choice," my mother said. Her voice had gone thin. The cashmere was gone. What remained was thread. I asked her for help. She offered. "Family takes care of family." Family. Cade's voice cracked the word in half. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at Jacqueline. "You told me the bank was handling it. You said Grandma set up an auto payment before she died. You said there was no mortgage issue. I said what needed to be said to keep this family together. You lied to me. I managed the situation, Cade. That is what mothers do. You lied to me so you could sell the house and give me money that was never yours to give. They were turning on each other. I did not move. I did not speak. I sat at my grandmother's oak table and watched my family collapse the way buildings collapse in controlled demolitions. It did not happen all at once. It fell floor by floor, each level dropping into the one beneath and pulling the next person into the rubble. Dennis Fry closed his portfolio. He capped his pen. He removed his glasses and placed them in his breast pocket, and he said with the careful neutrality of a man who has decided that his professional liability insurance does not cover this particular Sunday. I am going to excuse myself from this transaction. I recommend that all parties seek independent counsel. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the front door without shaking anyone's hand. The door closed behind him with a sound quieter than anything that had happened in that room, and somehow louder than everything. My mother turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but controlled the eyes of a woman who had spent 32 years managing the emotional weather of this family and had just realized that the forecast had changed permanently. Elise, sweetheart, you have to understand. Every backup plan has a price, I said. My voice was level, my hands were still. My grandmother's table was solid beneath my palms. Mine was $127,400, and 72 months of silence. The echo of Cade's sentence from 20 years ago landed on the table between us with all its accumulated weight. It was the same sentence he'd thrown at me like a ball he expected me to catch and carry. 20 years. From a driveway where a 14-year-old boy laughed while picking teams to a living room, where a 32-year-old woman set down a folder full of receipts and refused to sign, my father stood up. His chair moved backward and hit the wall with a soft thud. He opened his mouth. I watched his lips form the beginning of a word, not a sentence, just a single syllable. It was a shape that might have been I, or sorry, or nothing at all. Then he closed his mouth, pressed his hand once against the surface of the oak table flat, firm the way an engineer touches something he has measured, and found to be exactly as heavy as he feared, and walked out of the room. He did not say drive safe. He did not say anything. 3 weeks passed. I know because I counted every one of them, 21 days, 504 hours. The number sounded clinical, but felt like the distance between the person I had been when I walked into that room and the person I was when I walked out. The sale collapsed. Tricia filed a formal objection with the Hartford County Recorder's Office. The pending quitclaim deed was withdrawn 48 hours later. Ridgecrest Development Partners sent a letter terminating their offer, citing unresolved title issues, which was code for, "We didn't realize we were trying to buy a house that already belonged to someone else." Dennis Fry's name disappeared from the Crestview Legal Services website within a week. I checked things. Cade called me 4 times in the first 7 days. I did not answer. The calls came at predictable intervals. Tuesday evening, Thursday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday night. Each voicemail followed the same arc, the first 30 seconds confident explaining why this was all a misunderstanding, and the last 30 seconds quiet or trailing off into the kind of silence a man makes when he realizes he is talking to a machine that will not argue back. The 4th voicemail was different. It was 9 seconds long. He said, "I didn't know about the mortgage, Elise. I swear I didn't know." Then he hung up. I saved it. Not because I believed him. Belief requires evidence, and my 9 years of training had taught me to verify before I validated. But because it was the first time in my life, Cade had said my name without adding something to make it smaller. My mother called 14 times. I know because my phone logs calls, and I am a woman who reads logs. 14 calls, 0 voicemails. Jacqueline Morrow did not leave voicemails because voicemails are recordings and recordings are evidence. My mother had spent 32 years building a version of this family that could not survive contact with evidence. On the 11th day, she sent a text. 1 sentence. "This is not how family handles things, Elise." I read it 17 times. Each time the sentence meant something slightly different, the way a prism turns the same light into different colors, depending on the angle. Was it an accusation, a plea, an instruction, a threat? I decided it was all four. I did not reply. If you have ever stared at a message for longer than it took to write, you know that silence is not the absence of a response. It is the response. On the 15th day, my father called. Once. At 7:43 in the morning, which was early for Warren Morrow. A man who had spent 30 years waking at 6:15 for work and had in retirement drifted to a schedule that treated 8 o'clock as the starting line of human obligation. "Can we meet?" he said. No preamble, no throat clearing, no, "How are you?" which would have been the first time he had asked that question in a context where the answer might be something he did not want to hear. Where? "There's a diner on Route 9, Fern's. You know it." I knew it. Fern's was a breakfast place with green vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during a previous administration. My grandmother used to take me there after church on the Sundays when she did not feel like cooking, which was rare but which she described as giving the oak table a day off. I arrived first. I sat in a booth near the window and ordered coffee and a glass of water and did not touch either one. Warren arrived 3 minutes late, which was unusual for a man who had spent his entire career measuring things in fractions of millimeters. He was wearing a flannel shirt I recognized from 10 years ago and a jacket that was too light for November. He stood at the end of the booth for 4 seconds before sitting down across from me with the careful posture of a man about to attempt something he had never been trained for. We sat in silence for a while. The waitress refilled my coffee. A truck passed on Route 9. The fluorescent light above our booth flickered twice and then steadied. I thought about how my father had spent his whole life fixing things that flickered, engines, circuits, furnaces, and had never once tried to fix the thing that flickered. Most the space between him and the people he was supposed to love. He started. He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup. He put it down. He aligned the handle with the edge of the napkin, the way he aligned tools on his pegboard, precisely methodically, as if correctness of angle could substitute for correctness of action. "I should have said something," he said. "At the table, years ago, not just Sunday, all the Sundays." I waited. I did not help him. I had spent 32 years helping people in this family finish their sentences, and I was done. "Your mother, she has a way of making things sound right, even when they're not, and I let her. Because it was easier. Because fighting with Jacqueline is like arguing with weather. You don't win. You just get wet and go inside." He looked at me. His eyes were the same brown they had always been, steady, mechanical, the eyes of a man who understood torque and tension, but not the emotional equivalence of either. "I knew you were paying the mortgage," he said. "Not at first, but by year 3 I found the statements. I saw your name on the transfers, and I told myself it was fine because you could afford it, and Cade could not, and your mother said you had volunteered, and I chose to believe that because believing it meant I did not have to do anything." He paused. The coffee was getting cold. Outside, a woman walked past the window with a child in a red coat, and for a moment my father watched them with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not sadness exactly, but the awareness of sadness, which is worse because it means you know what you are missing but cannot reach it. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think I've earned that." "You haven't," I said. He nodded. "Once." A small nod, tight the kind of nod that engineers make when a measurement confirms what they already suspected. "Okay," he said. "Okay." We sat for another 12 minutes. He ate half a piece of toast. I drank my water. Neither of us spoke. When he stood to leave, he put a $10 bill on the table, too much for 2 coffees and a toast, and he said, "Drive safe, Elise." This time the sentence did not sound like a dismissal. It sounded like the only language he had. I went home that evening and sat at my pine table and wrote an email. I addressed it to my mother, my father, and Cade. The subject line was, "Conditions." The body was 3 paragraphs long. I did not pad it with warmth. I did not soften the edges. I wrote it the way I write audit findings, clearly, precisely, without apology. The first condition Jacqueline would acknowledge in writing, sent to all family members, that I had paid the mortgage on the Grandview Lane property for 6 years, totaling $127,400, and that no family member had acknowledged or reimbursed these payments. The second condition, Cade would present a written plan for repaying his share of the financial burden that had been placed on me, not immediately, not all at once, but structured with a timeline, because I did not want his money. I wanted him to understand what the money meant. The third condition, all future communication would occur in a neutral location. Not the house, not my mother's living room, not a room where the furniture had been arranged to make one person feel small, a diner, a park, a conference room with fluorescent lights and bad coffee. Anywhere that did not carry the weight of 32 years of imbalance. I wrote one final sentence. I am not closing the door, but I am the one who decides when it opens, how far, and who walks through. I read the email twice. I checked the spelling. I pressed send at 9:14 in the evening because I had looked at the clock. I remembered that 9:14 was the exact time Cade's text had arrived on the morning of our grandmother's funeral. Flight got canceled. Thinking of you all. And I thought some numbers circle back, not because they are meaningful, but because the universe has a strange, quiet sense of symmetry. I closed my laptop, I made chamomile tea, I sat in the dark of my condominium that nobody knew I owned in a building that used to be a mill in a life that I had built one receipt at a time. I felt something I had not felt in 6 years. I felt light. 2 months later, on a Sunday morning in January, I made French toast. I do not say this lightly. French toast was my grandmother's recipe, the real one, the one from the index card in the shoebox, written in her cramped handwriting with a coffee stain in the upper right corner that she never wiped off because she said it was proof the recipe worked. 3 eggs, a quarter cup of whole milk, a teaspoon of vanilla, a pinch of cinnamon so small you had to argue with yourself about whether it counted. Thick-cut brioche soaked for exactly 45 seconds per side. She timed it with the clock on the kitchen wall, the one shaped like a rooster that my grandfather had bought at a yard sale in 1977. My mother threw it away the week she moved in. I made the French toast at the oak table. My grandmother's oak table now sat in the kitchen of my condominium on Prospect Street, in the converted mill building that no one in my family had known about until 3 weeks ago, when I mentioned it in the email. I stated it not as a revelation, but as a fact, the same way I had stated the mortgage payments, the same way I had stated the conditions. Here is where I live. Here is what I paid. Here is what happens next. The table fit perfectly. It was too large for the space. Technically, I had to remove the breakfast island to make room, and the eastern corner jutted out past the line of the kitchen counter by 4 inches. It fit the way things fit when they belong somewhere, not because the measurements are correct, but because the object and the room have agreed to make it work. Simone arrived at 9:30. She knocked twice, which was her way, never 3, never 1, always 2, as if she had timed the smallest knock that would announce her without imposing. She brought a jar of blueberry preserves she had made in October, handwritten label, slightly crooked lid, the kind of gift that takes 6 hours to produce and 30 seconds to give. We ate at the oak table, 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cups of coffee, both black, both too hot, both held with both hands, the way women hold coffee when the conversation is more important than the temperature. Outside the window, snow was falling in the slow, indecisive way it falls in Connecticut in January, not a storm, not a flurry, just the sky, deciding flake by flake to cover everything in something clean. We did not talk about the family. We talked about Simone's pottery. She had a show coming up in Burlington, 14 pieces a series she called Vessels, which she described as things that hold other things and don't ask what they are. We talked about my work. I had been promoted again to manager, which meant I now supervised 3 junior accountants who called me Ms. Morrow, and did not know that the woman reviewing their case files had once sat on a kitchen floor holding a dead woman's phone number and wondering if precision was the same thing as strength. We talked about the snow, we talked about brioche, we talked about my grandmother, but only the good parts, the rooster clock, the tomato garden, the way she drove that green Subaru, like a woman who believed speed limits were suggestions and stop signs were invitations to pause and consider. Simone laughed at that, and her laugh filled the kitchen, the way my grandmother's laugh used to fill the old kitchen. And for a moment, the 2 rooms were the same room, separated by nothing except time and the 43 years of arguments the table had absorbed. After breakfast, Simone washed the dishes. I dried. We stood side by side at the sink, and she said without looking at me, "Your grandmother would have liked this. The table, the light, the French toast. She would have said the cinnamon was too much, but she would have eaten 3 pieces. It was a pinch." With Colette, a pinch was a philosophy. She believed in restraint, except with love. With love, she was excessive. I put the last plate in the cabinet. I folded the dish towel and hung it on the oven handle. I looked at the oak table, at the scratch I had made when I was 12, at the grain that darkened near the center, where decades of Sunday dinners had stained the wood a shade deeper than the edges, and I thought about the woman who bought it in 1981 for $215, because she believed a good table outlasts every argument. She was right, it had. Simone left at 11. She hugged me at the door, not a long hug, not a short one, exactly the kind of hug that a woman gives when she has been keeping a secret for 4 years and has finally set it down, and her arms remember what they are for. I went back to the kitchen. I poured a second cup of coffee. I sat at the oak table alone, and the snow kept falling, and the building was quiet except for the radiator clicking. The way old radiators do not broken, just old, just talking to itself in a language nobody else needed to understand. My phone buzzed. A text from Warren. 5 words. Can we talk just us? I picked up the phone. I read the message 3 times. I set the phone face down on the oak table beside the coffee, beside the plate where the last piece of French toast had gone cold. I did not reply, but I did not delete it. Some doors do not open all at once. Some doors open the way, snow falls slowly, 1 flake at a time, covering what came before with something lighter, something that does not erase the ground beneath it, but changes the way it looks in the morning light. I do not know if my father will ever walk through the door I have left open for him. I do not know if Cade will send the repayment plan. I do not know if my mother will write the letter. I do not know any of those things, and for the first time in 6 years, I am comfortable not knowing. Because the door is mine, the conditions are mine, the table is mine, and the woman sitting at it is no longer the backup plan. Now I want to talk to you. If you are watching this, and you are the one who pays the bills, nobody mentions the one who answers the phone when something breaks, the one who keeps the folder with the receipts because nobody else will. I want you to know something. Being reliable is not a flaw. Being dependable is not a weakness, but being taken for granted is not the price of being loved. And the moment you realize that the moment you set the pen down and say not with anger, but with clarity, "I need to read the documents," that is the moment your life begins to belong to you again. You do not have to shout. You do not have to leave. You do not have to burn anything down. You just have to know what you are worth, and then you have to let the numbers speak for themselves. If you are that person, tell me in the comments. Tell me what you carried. Tell me how long. Tell me when you set it down. I read every single one. Share it with someone who needs to hear that being the backup plan is not a life sentence. It is a starting position. And starting positions are only permanent if you never stand up. My grandmother bought an oak table in 1981 because she believed it would outlast every argument. She was right. But she did not say it like that. She left a walnut box for me to find when I was ready. Inside was the truth that the table did not care who sat at it. The table only cares that someone eventually tells the truth. I set the pen down, not because I was afraid, because I had been the one who signed without reading for too long. And the truth, it turns out, had been waiting for me all along, patient as a watch, still as an oak table, ready for the day I stopped being afraid.